We have on the line with us Amy Simon from sheshistory.com, our cultural historian. She's a playwright and performer, and this is Wednesday on the Nicole Sandler Show, our fabulous female segment. Is this Amy?
Hi, yes it is.
Hi, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Amy. Jacob Dean here.
Hi, Jacob. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, and so Nicole is telling me that I've never actually gotten to catch your segment with Nicole before, so my apologies for that. But you have a cool story to tell us about females making real history then and now, and I'd love to riff on this with you.
Great, let's riff. And it's, good luck keeping me down and telling you about just one fabulous female, because there's so many.
Excellent.
But we'll get to however many we can. You seem to get a real kick out of the historian that I call myself.
I love it. I'm a big, play on words. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. I loved what I just wrote down to do some research on the Iroquois, because, whenever somebody hears about what I do, which is write and perform about women who make and made history, they always tell me something I don't know. So I'm very interested now in learning about the Iroquois, because I focus a lot on fabulous females in America who are activists and, make the world better. But I can't wait to go do some research. I love what you were saying.
Oh, yeah. I found out about that because my former boss, I worked for the Thom Hartmann program for a number of years, and Tom wrote in one of his books called Threshold, talking about, basically it was about the empowerment of women in terms of overpopulation of the planet. And one of Tom's theses in the book was words to the effect of empowering women is really one of the key solutions to overpopulation. And these kinds of things. But yeah. What's on the who can we start with here? Or
I was going to talk today about a couple of fabulous females who are Quakers. And I want to talk about the Quakers, which really are called the Society of Friends, because they're a nonviolent group that absolutely oppose weapons and violence, and obviously it's very appropriate because of what we're all dealing with right now with, the incredible violence that we're all dealing with. The Quakers, they're really called the Society of Friends, and they're called the Quakers because they would get very excited at their religious meetings, and they would tremble and quake. I know, isn't that fun? So that's a fabulous little female fact. And the Quakers, they're still around today. They actually were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947 because they organized a group called American Friends Service Committee in 1917, and it was a non-combatant work in place of military service, and they were joined with the British Society of Friends. And then in 1947, they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which is wonderful. They came to this country in the 1600s. They started in England, and their leader was a guy named George Fox. And they came over here for religious freedom, and of course they were persecuted, unfortunately. A lot of Quakers were hung. Mary Dyer, D-Y-E-R, was one Quaker who would not stop being a Quaker, and they hung her in the square in Boston. And there were so many fabulous, not just females who were Quakers. President Nixon was a Quaker. William Penn was a Quaker. I can go on and on, but we'll talk about some fabulous women. One of them in particular was Lucretia Mott. And what I loved about the Quakers, aside from their absolute abstinence of violence, was they educated their women. They were probably the only group, in America in the early part of, in the 16 and 1700s, that let women preach. And this was a big no-no. Anne Hutchinson, who was a Quaker, she's also known as the mother of the First Amendment, and in the 1600s, she came over here looking for religious freedom as well, and she had a different idea about religion, and she tried to start her own religious sect. And, she went on trial for 2 years, and they kicked her out of the colony, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and she ended up, sadly and ironically, dying a very violent death on Long Island by some Indians. But she tried to speak in public. She held meetings in her own home, Anne Hutchinson, and that was a no-no. So Lucretia Mott was a huge pioneer, a Quaker, and she was ordained as a minister in 1821, and she was only 28 years old. And she was just an amazing, fabulous female. She was born in Nantucket, and back then her father was away at sea all the time, so she and her mom did everything. A lot of women were unrecognized for running the family business and doing, especially in the early part of our country. So I love Lucretia Mott. She was also a big fan of Mary Wollstonecraft. Have you ever heard of her?
I actually haven't heard of any of these, so this is fantastic.
Yeah, and don't feel badly that you don't. Most people don't. I didn't know about any of these women either, and I just to make you feel a little better, I find when I do the show and I perform or I talk about it, there's a sort of a collective sense of guilt that people don't know who these women are, and I don't want anyone to ever feel guilty. I started doing this because I'm raising two daughters, and one of my daughters came home from school when she was 10 years old and told me she was going to do her women's history report on Cher.
Oh.
Or Janet Jackson. And I said, and I've been a feminist, from way back, from the 70s. I'm 56 years old, and I love saying my age because I live in L.A., and it's practically illegal for a woman in L.A. to say their age, so I like to break the law. But I'm a feminist from the 70s, and, I'm raising two daughters, and they have no idea our youth. They have the worst role models. They think, Lindsay Lohan or Cher is someone you can do your women's history report on. So that's what inspires me to do this. And I really just love turning people onto it. So nobody knows who anybody is until they get a hold of me, like you. So now you're going to know. Mary Wollstonecraft was our first feminist writer back in the 1700s, and she wrote our first feminist book, which is called The Vindication of the Rights of Women. Or I like to call it, Don't Punish Me for Having Ovaries. That's my little nickname. But she was a fabulous feminist writer, and she really inspired Lucretia Mott. And Lucretia Mott inspired several other fabulous females. It's a wonderful chain of events how that happens. But what I loved about Lucretia Mott, again, was that she was a minister, and she was kind of like the Gloria Steinem of her day. And she inspired many. And she was in Philadelphia, and also the Quakers, Society of Friends, they were huge in a lot of wonderful movements, for instance, abolition. They were giant in the abolition movement. They were the first group in America to ban slavery. They wouldn't use any products that were made by slaves. I mean, they really stuck to their guns. They had a couple other funny little quirks. They did not believe in drinking anything at all, no alcohol, and they were very big in the temperance movement. So they were very organized, and they did a lot to make the world better. They just believed in kindness, and also they didn't believe in ever being idle. So I don't know how they would, the Quakers of today, I don't know how they deal with all our gadgets and TV and stuff, because back in Lucretia Mott's day, you were never idle. So in the 1830s, Lucretia Mott went to an anti-slavery meeting in Philadelphia, and she wanted to help with oppose slavery, and she tried to speak up. Excuse thee, and they always had this funny way of talking. They'd say thee and thou, and they were very, very simply dressed. That's not the case today, but it was in Lucretia Mott's day. So she's like, "Excuse thee, might I have a word?" And they say, "Quiet, woman, stand in the back, let the men do the talking." This is a theme of women's history, and a theme in my play, She's History. Women were always tried to be, told to be silent. Today, the Taliban is still trying to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know about Malala Yousafzai. Do you know about her?
Yes,
the 14-year-old Pakistan. Yeah, she's in my show now, and I'm sad that I had to put a 14-year-old girl in She's History because it's terrible that girls and women are still being silenced. But Lucretia Mott, like Malala, would not be silenced, and she went to this meeting, and they said, "Quiet, woman." She said, "You know what? I'm going to start my own damn thing." And she started the first female anti-slavery society in Philadelphia. So she could get up and speak and do what she wanted to do. And because she did that, in 1840, there was a big World Anti-Slavery Society meeting in England. It was global. And she got invited to it in England because she was head of the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society. So she gets on a boat to go over to England in 1840, and on the boat, she meets Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, are you familiar with her?
Absolutely.
And okay, good. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I'd heard her name, but most people don't know who she is.
Yeah. A lot of people don't.
Right. Well, she was 20 years younger than Lucretia Mott, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was actually on her honeymoon. So she was on the boat because her husband was Henry Stanton was an anti-slavery agent, and he was invited to the 1840 World Anti-Slavery meeting. All these things have giant names back then, names of books, just long titles. Anyway, Lucretia Mott is on the boat, and she was, a famous minister back then, and she was famous because she preached to what was called promiscuous audiences, and that means men and women. But it was a really big deal. When Anne Hutchinson tried it back in the 1600s, they banned, they threw her out of the colony and put her on trial. But Lucretia was an ordained Quaker minister, and she still shocked people. She actually almost had her house burned down for preaching. Because there were a lot of people that didn't think the Quakers should be doing what they were doing. Anyway, they meet on the boat in 1840, and they get to England to participate in this anti-slavery convention, and the women were not allowed to participate. Turn the women out, they said, and the women ended up having to go behind a curtain. They could not be on the floor and participate in the meeting. They were just constantly being turned out. Quiet woman, stand in the back. And I tell you this story because that meeting inspired the first women's convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls. Now, they got turned out in 1840, and they were pissed off, And the story has it that after the meeting, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they're walking around London arm in arm. They're pissed off. They're bonding. They're bitching, and they're moaning about the situation, and they decide they're going to have their own meeting. And 8 years later, they did. They ended up having the first, and it was Elizabeth Cady Stanton who really inspired the meeting because she and Lucretia met up again. And there were the four of the women were Quakers who started the Seneca Falls Convention, which is the first time on record that women demanded the right to vote. So that's a whole other story. But back to the Quakers. So Lucretia Mott was this major Quaker inspired by Mary Wollstonecraft, who inspired Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's buddy and partner, the greatest partnership in women's history, was with Susan B. Anthony, a major Quaker, major troublemaker. We know about her because she has her coin,
Yes.
How lucky that we know one fabulous female because she got her picture on a coin. But Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the greatest partnership, and they did so much. So she was a fabulous Quaker, and another amazing Quaker. And I can talk for hours about all the fabulous women who were Quakers. But Alice Paul was also a Quaker. Have you heard of her?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, she was from the 19th. She's basically the one who got the 19th Amendment passed, the women's right to vote in 1920. And Alice Paul was mentored in England she was a brilliantly educated, super educated, Ivy League educated girl. She was educated at Swarthmore College, which was started by Lucretia Mott and a lot of other Quakers. In 1933, it became non-secular, but that was a Quaker college, and she was very smart, and she went over to England and was educated and mentored by a couple of militant feminists who were called suffragettes, the Pankhursts. And if you think about Mary Poppins, remember Mary Poppins?
Oh, goodness, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember Mrs. Banks?
Yes.
Do you remember she was wearing that sash and she would sing this song, political equality and equal rights with man, take heart, for Mrs. Pankhurst has been clapped with irons again. And when I learned that, I said, that's the song that Mrs. Banks was singing in Mary Poppins. She was a big suffragette. Right. And she was singing about the Pankhursts. We don't know over here anything about the Pankhursts. They went around smashing windows to get attention for the women's right to vote. They would get arrested, they would go to jail, and they would go on hunger strikes. And it worked for them. So Alice Paul, she tried it over here in America. She was picketing in front of the White House. This is another whole wonderful story about women getting the right to vote. And she got thrown into jail and went on a hunger strike, but it didn't work. They force-fed her for a month. They stuck tubes down her throat and up her nose and force-fed her raw eggs twice a day for a month to get her to eat. She wouldn't do it. And then they hired a shrink to say she was insane because that's what we did with our women. Yeah.
Right.
So she was, all these women were incredibly brave. They're all like Nicole. To me, they're all like Nicole.
Yeah.
Nicole is one of these gals. Nicole, she went to jail.
Yes.
For standing up for her rights. So
Alan
Nicole
West.
is just like all these fabulous females to me.
You bet.
She's got big fat.
I'm sorry, Amy. What's the saying? Well-behaved people rarely make history, but
well-behaved women rarely make history. Right? Nicole makes history.
I hate to cut it short, Amy, because I love this conversation, but I do have the Talk Radio News Service calling in for our news update.
I know it happens every week.
But what's the Alice Walker line? Words to the effect of one of the easiest ways we give up our powers to think we don't have any to begin with. So I hope
I like that one.
I hope that this conversation has motivated you. Please check out sheshistory.com. And that was a really fascinating conversation, Amy. I look forward to maybe continuing it in the future, and at the very least, I'd love to have you on the show that I do, which is Filter Free Radio. I just
sure, anytime.
Just as a quick plug, we just did our most recent show is titled "From Dictatorship to Democracy," a show based on the book by Gene Sharp, and it's basically a conceptual framework for liberation and a fantastic, easy, short read, and a guide if you're interested and motivated in getting active in these kinds of things and you want to make a difference. Check out that book and totally check out sheshistory.com. Amy Simon, our cultural historian, thanks so much for the conversation.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
We'll talk to you soon.